Hello, everybody. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're going to talk about mental health and motherhood. Our guest is Natalie Wilkinson. She's a mom and the host of the podcast Rad Mom Radio. Welcome, Natalie. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so I live in the Central Valley of California with my family. I'm married, coming up on 10 years. I have a little boy named Riley. He's 8 years old, and Riley is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Like you said, I have a podcast, Rad Mom Radio. I've been doing that since May. And I also run a support group for moms of autistic kids here in the Central Valley. I've been doing that it'll be 5 years in July. So that's a big part of my day-to-day. Other than that, I don't know. My podcast is sounds a little bit kind of like yours. I like to focus on motherhood issues and mental health and stuff like that.
Awesome. So I know you've had depression and anxiety since you were a child. So have I. I think I've had both since I was about 8. I just didn't know that's what that was.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect you as a mother?
I would say, mental health issues for me as a mom, I feel like the biggest impact is that, there are so many things that I want to do and things that I want to be for my son. And the mental health issues are a barrier as far as like lack of motivation. And, something I'm learning lately is like, I struggle majorly with executive functioning. Like it's really hard for me to organize things and think about like how to execute different tasks. And so I think my biggest struggle with my mental health comes out in like just feeling like a bad mom because of my mental health issues. I tend to focus on the ways that I could do better as a mom instead of focusing on the ways that I am a good mom. So I feel like that's the biggest thing is that I have this vision or this picture in my mind of the kind of mom I want to be. And I feel like my mental health makes it hard to be that mom.
Yeah, and I know that feeling because in addition to depression and anxiety, I've also got chronic pain. So I definitely feel like, my daughter deserves a quote unquote better mom. And there are just so many things that I want to do that I can't. And that motivation thing is a real killer, especially when my mental health isn't great. And, when I'm in a lot of pain, generally my mental health isn't great. So it's definitely hard to get much done. I thought it was also interesting about kind of how you grew up. So I also grew up in a home where there was no space for feelings. When I was sad or angry, my dad would tell me, "You're just a child. You have no reason to be angry," or "You're just a child. You have no reason to be sad." And so I had to keep all of that in because he would get upset anytime I wasn't anything except for happy. And he would get upset if I wasn't happy enough. And I just feel like I could never get it right. And so in our home, we work extra hard to make space for feelings. With our daughter, she's going to be 10 in a few days. So she's 9. And it just kills me when she has trouble expressing her emotions or when she won't, because like we work so hard to make an environment that's safe for all of us to have whatever emotions we happen to be feeling. So talk about some of the challenge you faced in regards to this yourself and as a mother.
Yeah, so very similarly when I was a kid, the only emotions that were acceptable were like I guess happiness. I wasn't allowed to be angry. I wasn't allowed to be sad. And if I was sad, my parents both had different things that they would say. Like if I was sad, my dad would say, "Well, you need to be proactive." You need to basically like figure out how to deal with it kind of thing. And kids don't have coping skills. They just don't, unless they're taught them. They don't naturally know how to cope with big emotions. They have to be taught how to do that. And so having someone just say, be proactive about it is like, you might as well be speaking a language I don't understand. That doesn't mean anything to me as a kid. And then my mom, it was kind of like, I felt like all of my emotions were inconvenient to her. If I was sad, if I was scared, if I was angry. And it wasn't just when I was a kid, it was through my entire adult life too. I don't have a relationship with my mother. We've been estranged for about 7 years now. So when I talk about my relationship with her, I kind of tend to say in my entire relationship with her, because there was like a cutoff point. But yeah, that was always a thing. You're just never allowed to have feelings. And so I think what happens when you're not allowed to have feelings and you're not taught how to cope with your feelings, you have to develop your own coping skills. And that's kind of the same thing as like telling a child, you get to pick what you eat for dinner. Well, they're going to have candy and ice cream. Like they're not going to make good choices, right? So like, it's the same thing. Like you figure out how to deal with your feelings. And so I definitely turned to food. Food was my only comfort as a child. And that started about the time when I was 8 years old. It was the only thing I had control over. It was the only thing that that made me feel better. So I developed a really unhealthy relationship with food. But like, I guess my point in talking about that is just that no one ever taught me how to cope with my feelings. And so as a mom, like, when your kids are having big feelings, like it's our responsibility to guide them through that. Take a deep breath, use whatever words are helpful. Let's help you deal with this. And when you're not taught how to do that, it's really hard to teach someone else how to do it. And when your kids are having big emotions, like it triggers stuff in you too. Like for instance, I deal with sensory processing issues. So it's like when my son's being really loud or when he's overwhelming, like I'm having to regulate myself and help him regulate at the same time. And when no one teaches you how to do that, it's very overwhelming. So, this is kind of something I learned through his autism diagnosis, is like that sensory overload comes in and that can cause some big emotions, big reactions. And so it's kind of taught me how to help us both, at the same time, like let's get me settled, get you settled. And it's still something that I'm working on, but those are really big challenges. I think, telling people, I hear this a lot, like, don't cry, don't this, don't that. And I feel like it might be well-intentioned, but I think it's one of the worst things you can do with people is not let them have their feelings, because the feelings don't go anywhere. They're still there. And if you don't deal with them, you don't move forward. Like they just sit there and they fester and you really don't grow. You don't learn anything from that. So I would say that's like how that's had the biggest impact on me as a mom.
Yeah, I'm with you on the, don't cry, it'll be okay. I'm like, baby, cry it out. If you need to cry, cry. And then when she would come home from, school or from preschool and tell me, my teacher told me to stop crying, that just infuriates me. And I have to explain to her, she was just trying to calm you down. But if you need to cry because you are sad, then you need to cry. So
Yeah.
it was kind of hard to explain. Basically, I don't agree with your teacher, but still try to be respectful. And so what I always did, and I still struggle not to do this now, is I took all my feelings and I just stuffed them. And so what that did was create a lot of physical manifestations of headaches back at the time, and then physical pain all over my body. And so I'm working through that, and when I was, it's funny you mentioned food, because when I was 15, I developed an eating disorder, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, I, restricted my eating instead as a means of control. So I think it's just so interesting that both of us had environments where we couldn't express our feelings, and we both ended up with some kind of disordered eating. That's
Yeah. Well, food is like, I feel like in a situation where you feel like you're out of control, I feel like food is almost like it's like a last resort. It's like, I need to have something that makes me feel grounded and makes me feel, like I have some control over anything that happens to me. And I think, as people, like, we'll hold on to whatever we can. But like, going back to the crying thing, I don't know, like, I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, but I honestly feel, how people say, like, there's certain environments you shouldn't cry, like, you need to be professional, you need to do this, that, and the other. And I could understand that in certain contexts, because, like, for instance, like being a therapist, which is what I went to school to do, I could see why you should not cry while your clients are talking about themselves, like, because
right.
it's about them. You don't want to detract from, like, them processing their stuff. But like, say in a situation where, like, if you're a doctor, or if you're in a situation where you're having feelings and those feelings come up, like, I guess I don't understand why people are so anti-crying, like, in the context of, like, having an autistic child. We have something called IEP meetings, which is like a individualized education plan for a child in special education.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I'll hear people say, like, don't cry at the IEP meeting. But like, when someone's talking about your kid, because a lot of these meetings are talking about what your kid is struggling with. And as a parent, it's really hard to hear people talk about your kid in any kind of negative way, even if it's well-intentioned and factual. It's just hard to hear. And I'll hear people say, like, just make sure you don't cry. It's like, but we're talking about the most important thing in my whole life, which is my kid. I feel like crying makes sense in that context, like, having your emotions make sense. And I think there's a little bit of a don't cry because other people will think this, or they'll think that you're not strong, or they'll think that you can be taken advantage of. And it's like, I don't think you have to worry about what other people think about you crying. Like, if you need to cry for a minute, just do it, and then you can move on. But we have this thing, I think, in our culture about crying, and I don't really understand it.
I think maybe a lot of it is people are uncomfortable with the vulnerability, both in themselves, in situations, being vulnerable in front of other people, and also another person being that vulnerable in front of us.
Yeah.
I know, it's uncomfortable for people to see somebody else cry, because they
Yeah.
don't know what to do or how to react. So my gut instinct, it's about being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah.
Okay. So what's it like adding the extra layer of being a mother to an autistic child? Like, what kind of struggles do you have? How do you manage those struggles?
I would say it's changed over time. So my son was diagnosed with autism like a couple weeks before he turned 4, and he's 8 now. In the beginning, a lot of it was feeling completely isolated. I didn't have any friends who had autistic children or children with special needs. So I just felt like no one understood. People will a lot of times, like, try to point out the positive and, like, oh, don't worry about this. And I just felt like nobody understood what I was going through. So I felt extremely isolated and fearful, very fearful. You start to worry about things that you never thought you would worry about. Like, will my child ever be invited to a birthday party? Is he going to be able to take care of himself when he's grown up? Is he going to be able to have a job? Is he going to be able to fall in love? Like, just all of these things that you start to worry about. and you really can't stop yourself from worrying about it, but you also can't do anything about it. So it's this very helpless, like I can't do anything about what my child's going to be challenged with 20 years from now. I can't do anything about that right now, but I still can't make the thoughts go away. So in the beginning, that was huge. Just the anxiety, the overwhelm, the feeling of helplessness. And I would say, over the last 4 years, it's gotten like just a 180. It's gotten so much better as far as like I've gotten to see him grow and learn and make so much progress. And I have a community of like people who understand like what I experience, so I don't feel alone. I still struggle like with the future. Like I don't know what his future is going to be like, what he's going to be able to do, not going to be able to do. I mean, all parents struggle with that, I'm sure, to some extent, because none of us have a crystal ball, but that for sure. And then, like I mentioned before, the emotional regulation, and thankfully, like I'm not thankful for my sensory issues, but I'm thankful that it helps me have empathy. Because when he's experiencing, like literally, we deal with something every day, like socks are a big thing. Putting on a pair of socks to go to school, he feels something. I don't know, but he feels something in that sock that makes his little foot uncomfortable. And I think because I have those, like not with socks, but I have other sensory issues, I can have a lot of compassion and empathy for him and be patient and just give him that space to be. I mean, that's how he feels about his socks. It's bothering a part of his body. I can understand that. I can relate to that. I can have compassion for that. And so I would say those are kind of like the unique things that I've had to deal with or had to like work through because of his autism.
Yeah, my daughter's got pretty significant anxiety, and she has for years. When she was 5, I thought I need to send her to therapy, but I didn't want to be that mom who was sending her 5-year-old to therapy, right? But just like maybe she'll grow out of it. But by the time she was 6, I had to start her on it because I mean she was just so much anxiety, and a lot of her anxiety manifests as anger. So luckily with me, doing research and having severe anxiety myself, I can tell when she's getting out of control and I can help her. But it's definitely been lonely too, because, I don't tell, some people I think that are going to be judgmental that my daughter has bad anxiety. And I certainly don't tell the judgmental people, yes, my daughter's on a couple of medications for it, because there are a lot of people I've heard people say without me talking about my own daughter, oh, you shouldn't put kids on medications. Kids are over medicated these days and this, that, and the other. And while that may be true, I don't want them judging my decision or my husband's my decision to make this choice for our child that we think is right for her. We know it's right for her at this point in time. So I don't have, autistic child, but I have a severe anxiety child.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely been lonely.
Yeah. Anxiety is a really, really hard thing to deal with. Like as an adult, it's extremely challenging. I can't imagine for a child who doesn't know like how to express it. Like we learn coping skills, and that's how we get through things. But kids, like they haven't had that chance yet to figure out what helps me. It's a learning process. So yeah, anxiety is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked earlier, about motivation, dealing with depression and even anxiety. Motivation can be a huge issue. Sometimes it's impossible to even get out of bed, at least with me. How do you deal with your lack of motivation?
I really, really struggle with my lack of motivation. It's a huge struggle for me. I deal with it on a daily basis, and it's hard because I don't it's really hard to explain to people, like something as simple as making dinner, like the amount of motivation it can take to do the most simple tasks is so frustrating. And I really haven't found a solution for that, to be honest. My struggle on a daily basis isn't always the same, but I am not only am I someone that struggles with motivation, but I also am hard on myself. So I want to accomplish everything all at one time. And I get impatient with myself if I can't do that. But at the same time, I can't find the motivation to do the simplest of things. So, I mean, I always do what I need to do for my son. I think as moms, that's just what we do. But when it comes to other things, it's just such a hard struggle. And it's so hard to help people understand what that feels like. I've been in therapy for a couple years now, and something that my therapist has kind of pointed out is that a lot of my symptoms sound like ADHD, and not so much a hyperactive ADHD, but like an inattentive ADHD. Right. And, you know, something that people with ADHD struggle with is like executive functioning, where you think about the things you have to do to complete a task, but your brain, like my brain, if you told me like, okay, Natalie, you need to go do the dishes, my brain breaks that down into a million tasks. It's so frustrating. It's horrible. And I've noticed that since I was like a teenager, but I didn't know what it was. I thought it was just depression. But when your mind does that, it literally makes the simplest thing feel overwhelming. And then you just don't do it, you know? So I am still trying to figure out how to manage that, because it's literally probably my biggest struggle with my mental health is the motivation piece. And as a mom, it's just rough because you end up internalizing all of that, and it becomes you're a bad mom, you know? So it's hard.
Yeah, the best way that I've been able to describe, my inability to even get out of bed some days, whether that's because of the major depressive disorder or the anxiety or the lack of motivation, is it's just paralyzing. Like I want to get out of bed and do something, but I literally can't. Like my brain is not allowing my body to move and get out of this bed and do anything. And I'm with you on the dishes, like going and doing the dishes first. I mean, you got to unload the dishwasher. You got to find a place for things that don't necessarily fit in the space that you've got. Then you've got to, load the dishwasher, and it's multiple things. And with chronic pain, it's even worse because I know that it's going to make my back and my hip hurt to do the dishes. So that's just another element of fear there. Like, I fear that I'm going to cause myself more pain, and I have a lot of fear that I'm going to be overwhelmed once I start a task. So I kind of get stuck in the I'm overwhelmed before I even get to starting a task. It's kind of where I get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds like a lot like what I deal with. It's really hard. It does feel like you literally can't, like, your body works, that your arms and your legs work, but it literally feels like you can't do it.
Yeah. So a lot of us feel like bad moms. We've talked a little bit about that. Do you have any ways to get yourself out of that mindset?
That is another thing that I'm working on. And what I try, we're talking about like having a difficult childhood with like the emotional issues, not being allowed to feel feelings, not getting like that nurturing and acceptance and stuff like that. For me, I've really used that as a guide for the type of parent I want to be, so I really focus on accepting my son for who he is, giving him the support that he needs, being patient, being kind, all of those things to him. And so I'm trying to focus on the ways that I am a good mom, because that's huge. You know, being a good mom towards your children, supporting them emotionally is huge, especially like when you didn't get that yourself. So, but yeah, that would say that that's something that I focus on. There are so many ways that I'm a good mom. There's just I don't know, like I think the way that I think I fall short is I'm not that mom who makes pancakes on Sunday morning. I'm not that mom that takes their kid to the park every day after school, or that mom that you know, makes arts and crafts with their kid. I would love to do those things. I really would, but I cannot find the motivation or the energy to do them a lot of the time. So, you know, I don't want to be a good enough mom. I want to be a good mom. And I think that I am. Not that there's anything wrong with being a good enough mom. It's just that I want to be a good mom, you know, like I want to be like an awesome mom. And there's a lot of ways that I am an awesome mom, but those little ways that I fall short, I tend to focus on those. And I just need to stop doing that. Like, we're not all Instagram moms, you know, the perfect Instagram mom that has the clean house all the time and the, you know, the cookies and baking in the oven. And like, we're just not all that mom, and that's okay. Like, the things that we do well are big, you know? So that's what I'm trying to focus on lately, because I hear that negative voice a lot, that you're not doing a good enough job as a mom. So definitely still working on that.
Yeah, and I try to remind myself that those perfect Instagram family pictures, I've heard that there's a lot of screaming at the kids and a lot of drama that goes on to getting these quote unquote perfect pictures to show their quote unquote perfect family.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like they say, you know, social media isn't real life. It's just, you know, the highlight reels.
Right.
So people aren't showing you all the stuff they're really dealing with. And also on my first podcast that I did, I had my daughter on for just a quick interview, and we talked about, it was specifically related to chronic pain, but I think it would relate to mental health as well, and, you know, lack of motivation when it comes to mental health. And I asked her, you know, do you see that I'm trying, that I try to do my best to, you know, take care of you and to do things for you? And she said yes. And I said, you know, would you love me more if I didn't have these health issues? And she said, you know, of course not. I'd love you just the same. So even my 9-year-old daughter can see that I really do try. And one big thing that I tell, you know, my audience and anybody I talk to is just being present. So sometimes for, you know, whatever reason, pain, depression, anxiety, lack of motivation, like I don't feel like playing with her. But
Right.
sometimes I will, you know, lie on the bed and do voices for her Barbies while she does all the work. She moves them
Mm-hmm.
around. You know, all she cares about is that I'm there and I'm trying.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, they
be a
just
little
want
bit
you
of
to connect with them. That's that's
exactly,
what matters to them. So,
exactly. So where can we find out more about your podcast and anything else that you do?
so my podcast is called Rad Mom Radio. It's on Apple and Spotify and some of those other like smaller podcast streaming places. But yeah, you can find me there. I do have an Instagram also called Rad Mom Radio. Well, yeah.
Awesome. I'm writing that down so I can go follow you. And you can find me at ithurtstomom.com and at ithurtstomom on Instagram and Facebook. You can also email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. Wish everybody a blessed day. And just remember that your children love you as long as you're doing your best.